I'm Jeff Alsop, W1OH. It's down the display there. I've been a ham since I was 12 years old. I actually took my novice exam the evening of November 22nd, 1963, which you remember was a notable date. And of course, that in those days, it took a couple of months for the license to come in. Got a novice by January of 64 and went from there. I got a general class for a while. In the early 70s, mostly I did CW. I mean, I was never real fond of phone, but mostly I did CW and not much else while I was in my teens. In the 70s, I did a couple of upgrades and ended up with my extra class and started doing some other stuff. I a little bit got into some contest stuff, not real serious. And I made probably about 3 or 4 contacts on Oscar 6 mode A, which was, I think, 2 meters up and 10 meters down, just to say I did it. And I was involved with a couple of clubs. East Bay Amateur Wireless Association was my favorite. I was living in Barrington, Rhode Island at the time, and it was a good group of guys. And after moving to the Cape, I joined Falmouth Amateur Radio Association. And I went through a period where I was working at Woods Hole Oceanographic and in the oceanographic industry. Wasn't really interested in coming home and playing ham radio. So I kind of went through a lull like a lot of people do. And then somewhere along the way, back about 20 years ago, I kind of got the bug to get going again. At that point, I had got rid of most of my equipment. So I started off with a little QRP rig and went from there. So and since then, I've done a lot of, DXing and some contest stuff. And about 2 years ago, I decided, geez, it's time to try satellites again. So I think it was probably about January of 2018. So 2.5 years ago, I got started. And some of this will come out as we go through the talk, but my current experience sort of dates from that point forward. And I think I got some useful stuff for you guys to hear. So with that, I think we should probably start the presentation and see where we go. Okay, so there's the intro slide, right? It says, by the way, that I adapted this from a K5ND freebie on the web. Okay, and here's what we're going to talk about. You with me still?
We're here.
We are.
Yeah, we're with you.
All right.
Okay.
Make sure everybody else is muted.
We're all going to mute now. So.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go through a bunch of slides here and try to get through all this stuff. What are they? Something about orbits and how you track them, how you work them, what sort of equipment you need, what sort of software you need. And then I'm going to offer you a few pointers that I've learned over time. The biggest one being start simple, but we'll proceed. So one of the things that kind of got me going again was I'd done it before. I was reading about it and I thought, wow, this looks kind of neat. Let's get back to it. And a lot of time had passed. There's a bunch of satellites up there. There's a number of FM satellites, which are pretty easy to work, and quite a few linear satellites, as they're called. So, some of the attraction was there's actually, it says technical achievement. It's really, how do I get together enough stuff to actually do something? And that's an achievement in itself, it seems like, at the outside in particular. Once you get it going, it's kind of neat. You can, one of the things that people share is grid squares. That seems to be the common currency amongst satellite operators. And depending on the satellite, at least on the East Coast, you can work some Europeans. So there's kind of neat to be able to work Europeans, some South Americans, Central Americans. Again, depends on where you are, and it depends on the satellite footprint, which we'll talk about in a bit. I have not done anything activating as a rover. A lot of people do that. In fact, some people seem to spend a tremendous amount of time doing that. That's kind of their fun thing. ARRL has sort of the premier award for this, the VUCC, for 100 contacts. Now there's a VHF, UHF version of that, a couple of other versions, but there's also a satellite award. And once you've made 100 different grids, you can get the award from them. And then you can add on to that. There are people with several hundred grids. One of the objects with people in the US is typically try to work all 488 grids that are part of the continental United States. AMSAT itself, AMSAT is the national organization involved with satellites. They have a few awards. They don't seem to be as popular at all, but they are out there. And the main thing is, you're using low power. I mean, you don't really need most of the satellites 5 to 10 watts into even a minimal amount of gain antenna is plenty. And some of them less than that. The antennas are usually small. Things happen fast. The QSOs are usually short. Occasionally on a linear satellite, again, we'll talk about that in a moment, you'll have longer contacts, but in general, they're quite quick. But there's a system to it, and it works really well if you follow the system. And there's a lot of operators out there who will give you a lot of help. That was one thing that was really, really good. So, what are ham radio satellites? You see a new slide?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I guess we're in business here. Okay, they're orbiting repeaters and transponders. The pretty common ones are crossband VHF to UHF, which is nowadays referred to as mode VU, as opposed to way back, we call this stuff mode A and mode J and mode B and stuff. That terminology has gone away. It's a little clearer to call it mode VU, where the first thing is the uplink frequency, the second is the downlink. So mode VU is a VHF uplink and a UHF downlink, and UHF is the opposite. And there are mostly two types of satellites. There's the little FM repeater satellites, and the picture shows actually what's called a CubeSat. These things are actually 4 inches on a side, really tiny. And they typically just have a couple little dipole antennas for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, the common one. The sideband CW and more complicated linear transponders are mostly in larger satellites. I believe there may be at least a couple that are in CubeSat format as well, but there's a lot more variation there. And they're typically lower sideband up, so you get upper sideband coming down. Okay, let's see, orbits. I think everything that we have access to in the Western Hemisphere is an LEO type satellite. They're all typically in the, I would say, 200 or 300 kilometers up to 700 or 800 kilometer altitude range. And obviously, if they're a little higher, you get a bigger footprint, and that gives you a little more range. But there's only one geosynchronous right now, and that's on the other half of the planet. So unless you're going to move to Europe or India or China or something, you can't really use that.
Is there any chance of us getting one too?
There's talk about it, but it's expensive these days. And one of the things that's happening, I think, in the whole field is the realization that free rides, where your little satellite goes on a rocket as ballast, kind of a thing of the past. Everybody's discovered that they can put their thing up as ballast, and so there's a lot of competition for rides. So the likelihood of having a geosynchronous or a really high orbit thing is less and less with time, unless considerable money gets put into it. And I think the only reason there's one in the other hemisphere, whatever you want to call it, is that somebody in Bahrain or the United Arab Emirates or someplace put up millions of dollars to do it. So it's probably not happening here too soon. These satellites are not hard to work with. You have usually 10 to 15 minutes from acquisition of signal to loss of signal, AOS to LOS. About an hour and a half is the orbit time. And the important things are being able to track it and then dealing with the Doppler shift. And we'll get into that as we go along here. Among the active satellites right now, there are several digital ones that you can do APRS and other digital formats. There are quite a few linear satellites, including Oscar 7, which came back to life a few years ago. That was put up in the late 70s and died, I'm forgetting when, probably by about 1980, due to battery failures, I guess, at that point. And then a few years ago, it came back to life. Evidently, the theory is that whatever killed the batteries corroded away enough that the batteries were disconnected. And now the satellite works only in sunlight, but it's still a usable linear satellite. There are several FM satellites right now. This is already changing. AO92 is having trouble right now. Whether it's going to recover or not is unsure. But there are at least 2 or 3 that are functional and kind of fun to use. And in general, they're very busy on weekends, like a lot of ham radios. Things happen on the weekends. As a new guy, you probably want to try stuff during the week. You may want to try stuff the middle of the night. Actually, people are up doing that, but far fewer. In any case, there's quite a few satellites available. And if you go to amsat.org/status, you can find out kind of what's up there and whether it's functional, and get an idea what's likely to be working for you during the day. When we get to the end, I'll mention again, AMSAT is really important. So let's do a contact. The important stuff here is you need to know your location. Grid squares is as I said, it's the currency. So I'm in, for instance, Fox November 41 down here on the Cape. You need to know the 4-digit grid square, because your exchange basically is your call sign and your grid square. And if the guy at the other end gets your call sign and your grid square, you're golden. You've made the contact. And the important thing then, if you want any kind of credit for any of it, is everyone does Logbook of the World. So you have to do that. You can play around with it, but most stuff is confirmed back and forth by Logbook of the World. There's no easy way to do it otherwise. In any case, you got to know your grid square. You have to know which particular satellite you're going to work, and we'll talk about how you determine what's available when. But you need to know what frequencies they're on, and I keep a cheat sheet for that, which I would be happy to send to people. I'll make up something that I can send off to Pi, and he can put it in the newsletter or whatever, but there's some useful stuff there. And you need
we
to
can put it up on the website.
Yeah, okay. And there's what we call Keplerian elements. You don't really need to know a lot about that, except that they're a set of parameters that specify the orbit of the satellite. And you plug that stuff into a piece of tracking software, and it tells you where the satellite is and when you're going to see it in your area. And you really need to update them pretty regularly, but it's trivial to do. You don't really need to think about that. Once you have that information, there's a couple of ways. The really simple way is you go to amsat.org again, and they have a little tool like they're showing in the side here that gives you information on a satellite's acquisition time for you give your current location, and it tells you when you're going to acquire, how long it's going to be there, and what acquisition azimuth is, what LOS azimuth is, maximum elevation. And so you go out with even that minimal information with your portable gear or something, and you know where to aim your little directive antenna. You sort of line yourself up on various objects in your field of view, and you can track the satellite. And finally, it's radios. Okay, what radio do you need? There's a couple of ways to get going here, and I would recommend that you first work with what you got. Full duplex is best. Half duplex is tough because you can't tell if you're getting in, particularly with FM. You can't tell if you're getting in. You and 5 other people may have talked at the same moment, and you would never know. 2.5 years ago when I started, I had a VX5R and one of the long whips that goes on the little handheld. And I stood out in the circle outside my house. I knew when the pass for, I believe it was AO91 at that time. I knew when the pass was going to go by, and I'd listened to a few, which is one of the keys to this. Try try to listen to a few passes so you understand how to track and whether you can even hear it. And it was not a very busy pass, so I put out a call, and sure enough, I got a call from NA2AA, who you recognize now as the new CEO of ARRL. So he was my first contact back then, and he was very good about encouraging me to keep going and stuff. So I made a contact. I made a couple that way, and pretty quickly said, well, this is okay, but needs something a little better. At the time, Falmouth Amateur Radio Association still had a club station up at the base, and we had some gear there, and I continued to make some contacts that way. And pretty early on, I bought the Kenwood HT that's mentioned here. Kenwood THD72A is a full duplex handheld. It's a nice little radio. It also does APRS, so you can work through the APRS satellites with it too. But the main thing is it's a full duplex satellite, so you can, once you've found the satellite and you hear signals, you can listen for a clear spot. You definitely should hear yourself coming back. If you're not hearing yourself coming back, you got to start troubleshooting. Out there that I'm not familiar with is FM mobiles. There are a couple of ICOMs that are pretty popular. For portable rigs, what people do is they get FT817s or 818s, and you'll see reference once you get into this of the FT1634 or the FT1636, and you'll be scratching your head. What do they mean? Well, you clamp two of these things together and hang it on a neck strap around your neck, and you have a full duplex radio system. And apparently, some people go to the trouble. They look for FT817s with blown out finals, and that becomes their receive rig. And the one good 817 or 818 is a transmit rig, and they work with those. And you'll see that's a fairly common setup. And it's another option for full duplex, by the way, even for FM. Instead of buying a Kenwood, you can use your VX5 and your Bofang, and use one for receive and one for transmit. And it's a little cumbersome to work with. So you're kind of a one-arm paper hanger when you get going. I'll have some pictures here as we come along, but it does work. For base stations, ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu all have some stuff. The club had an IC 9100, which I used while the shack still existed. I had an FT 736 for a while, which is a nice much older rig, but is a perfectly good full duplex radio. I now have an IC 9700, which is a nice full duplex radio. And there are a couple of others out there. The link at the bottom, which is too long for you to copy right now, I'm sure, is a link that lists all sorts of full duplex radios going back 20 odd years. So there's a lot of stuff out there as used equipment, and sometimes that's a good option. Another path right now is mentioned just above that is SDRs for the receivers. So some people pair, again, something like an FT817 or 818 and an SDR receiver, and they end up with a full duplex package. So a lot of choices, and best if you can do something where you can hear your downlink, and that means full duplex. Antennas, as I mentioned, an HT with a long whipple is good enough. For a high overhead pass, it's not very far to the satellite. It's a couple hundred miles. Now, if it's 300 kilometers up there, it's not very far from you. Yeah, as it gets towards the horizon, it's a long way, but if it's a relatively overhead pass, the distance is pretty short, and it will work. Dual band base and mobile antennas. At the the club shack up on the base, I was using the ICOM 9100, and we had one of those, what is it, a Comet X50, I guess, or a Diamond X50, which is a gain dual band vertical. And that worked just fine. You could work satellites there virtually down to the horizon and overhead. The fact that it's a vertical, and in theory there's not much radiation up, doesn't matter because it's close. You need the gain when the thing's 1,500 miles out towards the horizon, but you don't need a lot of gain to talk to it when it's 150 miles or 200 miles overhead. So it worked surprisingly well. It was a sort of a poor man's way to get started. Other options are the WA5 VJB Cheap Yagi series that you find online. I have and use both the handheld Arrow or the elk antenna. Those are both pretty commonly used by people who are operating portable or any kind of handheld operation. I like the elk slightly better because it's slightly lighter, but all in all, they both work pretty well. You can use fixed elevation Yagis. Another simple method is you have a rotator and you have a couple of Yagis, one for 70 centimeters and one for 2 meters, and you mount them at about a 30-degree up angle and rotate them. And that, again, because if the vertical works, then that should work also. And the same principle. The fact that it doesn't work real well, doesn't have a lot of gain straight up, doesn't really make a lot of difference because the satellite's so close. And then when you want to get real complicated, you can do Azel rotators and even switchable circular polarization. My message to people is listen first, use what you've got, and see what you can do, because you'll be amazed what actually works, and just work your way up from there. Software, lots of different kinds of software. There's a lot of phone applications, and we'll look at a couple of those in a moment. There's the online prediction stuff that you saw earlier at AMSAT, which you can plug in some times and it'll print out a set of parameters that you could use to track something. The Cadillac stuff is for Windows SAT PC 32, which is getting a little long in the tooth, but works quite well. The developer is right there online. You have access to him, and he answers questions, and it works pretty well. The Mac package, which is actually pictured here on this slide, is a more modern piece of software, and it works really well. I've been using both. I like the Mac Doppler stuff a little better just because of the display and stuff, but both systems work quite well, and they work quite well on your Mac. So those are pretty good. There's a couple of other things out there, but I wouldn't recommend anything else. Once you have the tracking software, you can do automatic Doppler correction, which really eases the tracking issue. And all these packages of software, whether it's a phone application or a full-blown Windows or Mac OS application, have some simple way to download and update your Keplerian elements, so you're actually tracking where the satellite is. If you turn your rig off and don't turn the stuff on for a few months and come back, it's not going to see the satellite where it said it did a few months ago. You definitely need to keep that updated. SAT PC 32, you have to do that manually. Mac Doppler does it automatically. Most of the phone apps, I believe, do that automatically. Phone apps, because this is a stolen presentation, K5ND mentioned GoSatWatch for the iPhone. That's what's shown on this display. I played with that a little bit, and then I found something for the iPhone called SatSat, and I found that easier to use. It had nice displays of the relative path to your location, and a trivial way to look through a list of passes and say, aha, here's a pass. It's a reasonable time of day. I don't have to get up at 2 a.m. and it's a reasonable altitude. It's not going to be 3 degrees above the horizon. It's going to be 40 degrees above the horizon. And you can, one tap and it goes into your calendar, and it's there to pester you later on in the week. You can go through a whole week of stuff and load your calendar up if you're really chasing. For Android, I don't know much about it. I mentioned these two, AMSAT Droid and ISS Detector, because that's what people seem to be using when they have Android phones. Now I'm going to put this on here. KJ4AKV is pretty active. He does a lot of videos, and I thought it might be good to see if we could watch him run a few contacts. This video is from several years ago during National Parks on the Air. He's someplace down in the Great Smoky Mountains, I believe, in this video. But let's see if we can get this to go, and we'll let it run through. I think it's about 6 or 7 minutes long, 8 minutes long, something like that. If we get really bored, you can yell at me, and we can abort out of it and continue. So let's see if we can get it to go. It's worth looking at, and I'll put that in the reference information. I'll have a bunch of links, including links to KJ4AKV and WD9EWK. Both those guys have posted a lot of YouTube videos that are kind of interesting to see what they're doing and how they're doing stuff. So it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. I'm sorry that didn't work here. Anyhow, we've moved on here. What else do I need? Well, the first thing again was call and 4-digit grid is fundamental. If you're full duplex, you got to have headphones. So once in a while you'll get on, you'll be listening to a satellite pass, and you'll hear somebody get on, and the squeal and howl happen because there's feedback. And even though it's going up to a satellite and back down, if you're trying to run full duplex without, and talking into a microphone and listening on a speaker, it's not going to work. You got to have headphones. Okay. Next thing is, if you can't hear yourself when it's full duplex, you got to figure out what's wrong. You should be able to hear yourself. If you're not hearing yourself, either you're not listening in the right place, or something else is wrong. If you start by trying to listen to a few passes, don't try talking. Just get out there, even with your handheld, and you don't even need a long rubber ducky to listen to these things. If you get a high overhead pass, you listen and you'll hear things happening at a breakneck pace. You got to have a voice recorder. If you look at that image that's to the right, that's my setup with the elk antenna in the back of my truck one day. There's the HT. I got a little scratch pad. I got a little clock there. I know what the pass time is, and I've already kind of taken bearings on stuff on the horizon, so I kind of know where I should start listening for the satellite to appear, and where I should more or less where I should swing the antenna. Once you find it, you can kind of swing the antenna back and forth a little bit and find the hot spot, and you track it that way anyway. But it's good to know more or less. If you notice, there's a set of headphones there, right? There's a set of headphones there, and a little Y cable, and the headphones are on my head, and the Y cable takes the audio off to my little Sony recorder. And some people will try to record their direct audio, their direct transmit audio. I don't find that's worthwhile. I only record the relayed transmit audio, which also confirms that I'm actually getting through the satellite. So that setup works pretty well. And so in the course of a pass, and if we could have watched that video, that would have been great. You see, he's not writing anything down. He's recording at the same time. You go back afterwards and use something. I use Audacity, and I just pick through and find all the contacts. There's really no other easy way to do it, especially when you're doing all this stuff handheld, because you got the antenna in one hand, you got the headphones on your head, you got the HT in the other hand. And by the way, you're tracking the Doppler with that HT. So, it seems like we missed a slide. One of the things that happens here is to track the Doppler for FM satellites. You typically have a table of 5 kilohertz increments, and as it's approaching, it's going to shift things. Up. So you start low. So for instance, I'm looking at my cheat sheet, which I'll let you guys have to post. But for AO91, as it's approaching, even though its center frequency is 435.25, you start transmitting early on at 435.24, because Doppler effect is much greater at 70 centimeters than it is at 2 meters. You listen the whole time at 145.96, but you're transmitting at different frequencies. And the first several minutes of if you get a sort of overhead pass where you got 12, 13 minutes to go, at least the first 5 minutes probably on that first frequency. And the last 5 minutes is probably on the final frequency at 435.26, which is 10 kilohertz above the center frequency. The three in the middle happen really quick. Things happen fast right in the middle. And you kind of have to be aware of that. It's a little tough. You get used to it after a while. And again, if you're listening full duplex, you can tell, oh, I'm not quite getting in, or I'm sounding kind of noisy. Time to switch. And you kind of learn how to do that. When you're all done, you picked everything apart, put it all in your logging software somewhere, whatever you happen to use, and upload it as a logbook of the world, because that's the way you'll get 98% of your confirmations that way. And listening is very important.
Jeff, I have a question for you.
Yep.
Most cheaper radios don't increment frequencies in 1 kilohertz separation. It's usually 5. Isn't that correct? I mean,
yeah, that's what we're doing. We're doing 5 kilohertz is perfectly adequate. The FM capture effect kind of saves you there, so that works just fine. There's a few radios out there. There's a few radios out there that I think do 2.5 kilohertz. It's just not worth the hassle of trying to track it. By the same token, if you're actually using your computer to correct for the Doppler, you just let it do what it does. It will do a little bit of correction even on the FM ones, but it's not enough to be a showstopper when you're doing the handheld. So again, listen some more, and try to kind of get the lay of the land before you really dive into this. So let's see. All right, for more information, there are a couple of books out there. AMSAT's probably worth joining at least for a year. Most of their website is available regardless of whether you're a member or not. One of the things you get if you join is typically you get a copy of the year's latest Getting Started with Amateur Satellites, which is a very informative book full of stuff about the current satellites and how to do things. That's worth getting, and usually you can get a PDF of it too. I'm a real believer in PDFs because I have all my documentation for my radios, for the AMSAT stuff, you name it, on my phone. I can at least have something if I'm desperate that's right there in my hand. ARRL currently has a little book called Amateur Radio Satellites for Beginners. It's okay. It's got one glaring mistake related to the Doppler correction for AO91, I think. And if you look around online, you'll find there was an older ARRL satellite handbook from, I want to say 8 or 10 years ago. It's sometimes available on the used book market, which has a lot of older information. Some information is certainly valid. Stuff about tracking and how things work is certainly valid. The satellites are mostly gone, but it is kind of informative, and if you can get a hold of it, it might be worth having. So website with lots of good info is AMSAT, www.amsat.org. That's got all sorts of stuff. Social media, Facebook, there are a couple of AMSAT groups. There's an official AMSAT one. There's another amateur satellite something group. And also a lot of people follow Twitter. As you hear people on, and you listen over a period of time, you'll hear a lot of calls again and again. You'll probably work some of them. And if you're on Twitter, those guys are typically on Twitter and announcing what they're doing, talking about what they did. So that's kind of a worthwhile thing. My contact information is here. And I can send you stuff, or if you guys would prefer, I can go through Pi and get it posted. Either way works for me. Now let's see, I think I got one more slide here. Yeah. I tacked this one on just so you have some pictures of what I was doing. On the left there, again, you see sort of the standard FM portable setup, only this time with an arrow antenna in the back of my truck. And in that upper right, I'm sitting on the Cape here at Southgate Beach in Mashpee. And see that horizon? That's the kind of horizon you'd like to have if you can. The closer you can come to that, the more fun you're going to have. You can work stuff right down to the horizon there, and that little whip. That if you look close at the truck, there's a little quarter wave. It's a little quarter wave dual band mag mount. I've made dozens and dozens and dozens of contacts on that, both with the handheld. One day I had an appointment at Falmouth Hospital. I was sitting in the parking lot there where the horizon really stinks, and I still made half a dozen contacts on an overhead pass using that antenna and the handheld in the truck. So it doesn't take a whole lot. And then on the lower right there, occasionally I've taken the ICOM 9700 out and run linear satellites out of the truck with that little antenna. So there's a lot of different ways to do stuff, and you just got to try, experiment. That's where the fun is. And I believe that's it. Yep.
When you're using one antenna like that whip on the truck, would you use a duplexer going between two radios, or how does that work?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, it depends. The handheld does that itself. I mean, you got one antenna connection there for both men. So that's the duplexer in a sense is built in. With the 9700, I have an MX.
But if you were using two,
you could use two separate antennas. Yeah, you get two outputs on the 9700. Okay. If you were doing it on the handheld, you'd have to do the opposite. You'd have to use the diplexer or whatever to split the single output into two antennas. But yes, you can do that. Okay. It's certainly.
What kind of power do you use with the 9700, if you don't mind me asking? Because that goes up to 100 watts, right?
Yeah, you 10 watts is plenty. Yeah. It really is.
Okay.
You use much more than that, you start overpowering things, and there's no point. The receivers on these things are quite sensitive, and you don't. I think the trouble with running higher power is there's a good possibility that you get into the satellite when you can't hear it, and that's not good. So typically people run, all the HTs and the FT 817s are 5 watts or less. And a lot of these satellites, if you're running a watt, that's plenty. And part of the trick for me has been pick my passes. I get the path prediction software out, and I look for the passes that are going to be overhead. First of all, those are the best ones because you're going to get the strongest signals that way. And you may not work stuff too close to the horizon, but you'll get strong signals at least in the middle. So
I would think that AMSAT probably has some standards that they would encourage with people not to run higher power. I think, and I agree with what you said about at least for 1 year, for anybody that has any interest in this, to at least for 1 year join AMSAT, because they're kind of like, they're the clearinghouse for all the information, and they act as the spokespeople, and I think it's a well worth doing. And do you want to mention anything about the ISS, because some of us lately have been tracking that, and I know that they just recently got some kind of a repeater going up there. Do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah. Okay. The ISS has had older equipment for a long time, and until recently, about the only thing that was really working well there was the APRS digipeater. So you could send APRS through it, and that worked pretty easily. But they were gone on again, off again. They recently, finally, after it's taken them a couple of years to get it together. I think the equipment has been up there for at least 6 months. And finally, recently, they installed it and they set it up for a repeater mode So it's voice repeater, and it's a hot commodity at the moment. There's a lot of people getting on that. I'm sure if you listen on the downlink frequency, which I believe is up at 70 centimeters, you'll hear lots of activity. Probably not the easiest thing to get in on right now, especially as a newbie, as a novice, novice satellite operator. But yeah, it's definitely worth listening to. How long they will keep it on that, and whether, I mean, the equipment is supposed to be able to do slow scan TV, and also APRS. So I'm guessing once the initial novelty of always having the voice repeater on, they'll periodically switch around. So you'll find some period of time where it's one, and another period of time where it's another. Be interesting to see. I mean, it's kind of a new thing.
So I'm guessing though that that's not the same radio that they would use when they're doing the, let's say, talking with the schools, or when the occasionally some of the astronauts in their spare time would get on and have QSOs. So we're talking about something different from that.
Yep. Yeah. I'm not sure how integrated the packages are and whether they've changed everything. And there's stuff for the astronauts to talk directly at 145/800. The old APRS was at 145, 145/825, I think, or 144. I'm forgetting the frequency. They had a couple of frequencies that were the standard ones, and that's changed a little bit with this repeater. And I'm not sure all the details of that. I haven't really paid attention to that particular aspect.
And some of the satellite, maybe not this particular one, but some of the satellites are also doing FT8. Is that right?
I don't think the general thing is FM satellites are voice only, and the linear satellites typically are just doing sideband and CW. A lot of other stuff just uses too much power. I think occasionally somebody will say, okay, we'll try another mode for a short period of time. And I haven't chased that particular one. There are a couple that will do PSK. So that one has been done. FT8, I don't know if I've heard of that one yet or not.
Now, are there user groups? I'm guessing that there must be, like some of us belong to various clubs, and we get, digest of emails, a couple of times a week, or maybe sometimes once a day. And I'm guessing as some of these satellites go through different mode changes by the control operators down below, that would be the sort of thing that you'd need to keep up on. So anything there that you would recommend as far as user groups to subscribe to?
The only one I know of for sure is there's an AMSAT bulletin board. That's a email bulletin list, and a lot of information flows through that all the time. That's probably the most common one. And also some of the big names at AMSAT use Twitter. And just announce stuff that way. So you'll see announcements of mode changes and stuff there, and you'll definitely see it on the bulletin board and see various discussion of that. The other thing is to do Facebook groups. The Facebook groups have a lot of information also. You kind of want all the information sources, and kind of eventually you'll decide, well, this one's worth more than others, but they're all informative at least part of the time.
Yeah, I would imagine a newcomer could get overwhelmed with so much. But that's great. I would think Facebook would be a great start. I have two other things, and then let's just throw it out here. But I have been waiting. There was an announcement about a year and a half ago about I believe this is a designation for a Chinese satellite, CAS-7-A, which was this, when I was reading the specs on this thing, proposed to be launched now supposedly this month. But it's going to have a mode K on it, like the old RS-1213. Is that, anything about that?
I don't know if that's been launched yet or not. There are a bunch of Chinese satellites, linear satellites, that are on my cheat sheet, in which you'll find on the AMSAT status list. There's CAS-4A and 4B, which are really, really good linear satellites, really easy to get into. And then there's XW2AB, sometimes C, D, and F. A, B, and F are always in pretty good shape. The other ones are on again, off again. I don't even have all the newest stuff out there on my list for linears, because there's just so much stuff that works. FO29 was a Fuji Oscar. That one's working a little more intermittently than it was once upon a time, but that's also another easy to work linear satellite. There's a lot of them out there, but generally they're expecting you to use sideband or CW, nothing else.
Yeah, well, the reason that the CAS 7A intrigued me was because my satellite experience goes back to the days when you were talking about early on here. You mentioned something about RS-15, but I had done. I'm going to say I made 1,000 contacts on RS-1213. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I've got some pages and pages of contacts there, and I was fascinated. And the idea and I think they called that mode K, but I made all of those contacts using 1HF radio, and
Yeah.
it was, for me, it was just like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question right now. I know that there's AO7 still does occasionally mode A. Everybody gets mad when it happens because with no batteries, it sort of spontaneously swaps from its normal old mode B, which is 70 centimeters up and 2 meters down, and somebody will run a little too much power and switch the other mode into darkness, and the next pass it comes into daylight, and it comes back up on the correct mode. But most of the stuff right now is 2 meters and 70 centimeters. AO92, which is failing currently, had a 23 centimeter uplink, and I was kind of looking forward to trying that with the IC 9700. But unfortunately, it looks like that guy's going to go away. They're not sure what's happening, but it's become more and more intermittent here in recent weeks. And there are a couple out there that perhaps put up from India or Southeast Asia somewhere that have even higher frequency uplinks. Not a lot of that stuff. Most of it's concentrated on 2 meters and 70 centimeters.
I checked the AMSAT website this week, and there's supposed to be a Chinese launch today, September 15th, for a CAS, I think H and J or K, and they were both FM and linear.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, AMSAT, the website doesn't look like it's been updated since May, so I don't know how current that still is.
Yeah, I don't know either. They're having a bit of internal political uproar these days, so I'm not sure how that's affecting maintenance of the website. Hopefully they straighten themselves out and move along.
So and then the next CAS satellites, which I think you're interested in, the next one was scheduled October of 2021. So there's going to be like 4 or 5 Chinese satellites going up in the next 12 months. 12, 15
well, and in the specs on the satellite, that was the fact that it had listed this mode K, that's the one with a 15 meter uplink and a 10 meter downlink. So that just intrigued me that they were, finally going to be getting back to something like that. I just have one last question for Jeff, and then anybody else just jump in there. But I didn't see a mention of the egg beater antennas, and that's an antenna that I've seen listed. I've heard people using those antennas, and I see them in the magazines. So do you have any experience with those?
I don't. Anecdotally, I've seen a lot of people say they work equally badly in any direction. The problem is they're in theory trying to smooth out the fact that a vertical has a null off the end, and it doesn't really help. They sacrifice gain at a distance on low angle passes for the sake of gain they don't need straight up, and they're complicated. So there's probably not a lot to be gained there. If you're gonna go to the expense of that or the hassle of putting it together, you're probably better off to get a TV rotator and a couple of Yagis and just up angle the Yagis at 30 or so degrees and go to town. and you'll do probably better just that way. So.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to know. I've seen those, and they did seem to be a little bit pricey. And then I noticed that if you added radials to it, it increased the price, but supposedly increased the performance too.
You have to you have to read the information on it. Oh, I should mention one more thing about AMSAT right now. One of the new things they've instituted just in the last few months is they started to put their back issues online. So the PDFs of their back issues of their monthly magazine are available, and that's worth it in itself. You can, again, with your 1 year membership, you can find out a lot of stuff, and you can download some years of back issues, which would be handy to have in your library. And whether you decide to, I probably will continue to support that. I've been a member now for 3 years, and I'll probably continue to do that. But I figure the money probably goes to something useful.
Good. And I think I bought the software through them at one time. I bought the tracking software. So anybody else have any questions now for Jeff? And also, if you have any questions for Jeff on how to run a PowerPoint presentation here on Zoom, because he has intimate experience in this. Go ahead, guys. Okay, come on, you guys. Any of you satellite up?
I've got a question. All right, let me see if this works first. Hold on.
We can hear you.
So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I think I'm trying to screen share on my phone. I downloaded SatSat, so bear with me.
Jeff will tell you how to do that.
All right, do you see? You don't see my phone, do you? You do.
I see something, yeah.
Yeah, now we do.
Oh, cool. This worked. Yay.
Yeah, those are the screens.
All right, so this is that app Jeff had spoke of.
You can see it on my phone too.
That way, yes. So I guess, so if I just picked 2 satellites to start with. So when I'm looking at this 64 degrees for the International Space...
I have my calendar here.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say yours must be substantially... Yeah, mine just the 2. So when I'm looking at degrees, and in this instance, 64, is that 64 degrees in pointing towards upwards, or is that compass direction?
No, that's elevation. So that's going to be a 64-degree elevation pass, which means it's a pretty good pass. Okay, and that image shows you you're going to acquire signal in the lower left in the southwest.
Yep.
It's going to run not quite overhead, but sort of towards your southeast, and it's going to disappear in the northeast. So that gives you a good image of, okay, I'm sitting out someplace outdoors. I get my bearings and I say, oh, there's a tree there, and there's there's a tree in one place and there's a building in another. So I kind of know the endpoints of the pass, and you can kind of track just based on that. You at least know you're in the ballpark with your antenna.
And as far as elevation, as far as in this is that one with the 64-degree marking. My highest up I'd be pointing it would be at that 64.
Yep.
At its halfway point.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's 0, 30, 60, and 90 degrees here on the rings.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. That was it, as a just download and poking around on the app. All right.
It's a great little app.
So in 5 minutes, you can go outside and you're going to start to see it.
The ISS has got a close pass here, and
3 minutes.
Yeah, if you put their download frequency in there, I guarantee you'll hear something. I did the other morning. It was about 4 o'clock. There was all kinds of chatter on there.
Yeah, and mine for FN 41 tells me it's going to be a 75-degree pass. So for me, it's even better. I don't know where you are, Chris, but
I'm in Quincy right now.
You know what I'm looking for, Pi? I think I have it here in the drawer. You worked RS-15. I've still got my Oscar locator, but I think the plastic is a little yellow now on it.
So these apps, all this stuff is wonderful. It's great. I love the technology. But when I first learned about satellites, and again, it was back, with the RS-1213, which was an HF one. Someone told me how to set my radio. I was talking with him on 20 meters having a QSO. He told me what to do. And he said, in 4 minutes, he says, that satellite's over you right now. In 4 minutes, you're going to be able to hear me such and such a frequency. Anyways, after I worked him and I worked a couple more people, I was hooked. But then we went back to 20 meters and finished up our conversation after the satellite disappeared. And he said, okay, get out a pad of paper. And he says, now write down the time that it started. He says, keep adding 90 minutes. And so basically what I did for the next week until I got a Commodore 64 tracking program, I did it all but on paper, just figured every 90 minutes the thing was going to be coming back around again. And basically you get 3 passes in a row, and then you get 3 passes that aren't visible, and then 3 that are visible. It's like, and that's how I started off.
Yep.
Ask you a quick question. What is the name of that app again?
The iPhone app?
Yes, please. The one that was just shown.
Oh, SAT, SAT. It's at it's at their iTunes store, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I downloaded it a minute ago.
Yeah.
Everybody
I found it quite useful. So.
SAT.
Yep.
Thank you.
And
Anybody else have anything
well,
for
I hope
Jeff?
this was kind of informative to you guys.
Yeah, it was great.
Jeff,
It definitely has been, yes. We're going to share the, you had some, within the presentation, you had a couple of links there, but when you send that email that you said you were going to send a follow-up email, if you have any links that you'd like us to put up on the web page to accompany your presentation, we can do that.
Yeah, I've got something with about a half dozen, 8 links, something like that. I have a version of my little cheat sheet that's about a year and something old. Might as well have that. It's just actually I should send you the docx that I turned into a PDF, because you can then edit it yourself and take out the things that are dead and add new things in. It's very handy to have a little paper cheat sheet when you're operating too, especially when you're operating off the back of the truck. And working a particular satellite, you can kind of, I stick it inside a little plastic binder, and I can look at the thing and reference it and remind myself, oh yeah, here's where I start, here's what I do for that particular satellite. So it's another handy thing to have.
That sounds good. And the idea about the whole thing with the Doppler shift, it sounds complicated in the beginning about having to tune the radio or whatever, but if you have a 15-minute pass, and basically, like you said, you start off 10 low, halfway through it, you're midpoint of the frequency, and then towards the end, you've shifted up to the upper frequency. And it's kind of like, if it's only a 6-minute pass, you just do that in a faster sequence.
Yep. And it as I say, it seems to sort of front and end load the thing. So most of the time is spent at the 2 extremes, and the frequencies in the middle go by pretty quick.
So, if we were, since we're doing this in real time, and Chris nicely put that up there showing us that the ISS is coming overhead here right now in a visible pass, I'm going to jump up. I don't know whether everybody else wants to jump up and take a look outside and see if you can see it, but I will be right back if you guys continue. I'm just very curious here.
It might be obscured by smoke.
Yeah, and not all passes are visible. They may be radio visible, but they're not optically visible too. It depends on the sun and where the shadow of the Earth is too. That pass, did Pi go?
No, I didn't. I know that I was going to say that to you. The pass the other night was a non-visible pass.
It was a non-visible one.
Right. I know, because it was too late. Yeah.
I heard great communications as it was going over, and I'm staring up into a completely open blank sky, and I can't see the thing. But I certainly had the beam focused on it, and I actually recorded some great conversations.
What's the downlink frequency now? Is it 145.9 or 0.8?
What?
For the
For-
ISS repeater.
The new ISS.
70 centimeter down like.
Is
Yeah.
it 70 centimeter, 437 something?
Hang on. It's. I'll tell you in a second, Bob. I just had it up here. Bu- 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 I can find it. Where the hell is it? It is the downlink is 437-800.
Okay, that's what I have. Yep.
So, do you recommend starting with FM satellites? And then I started listening a while back. I haven't transmitted into it, but I start with FM. FMs are easy, much easier than the other method there of actually tracking the sideband satellites, the linear satellites. It seems like there's a lot more to do for the linear passes. You've got a bandwidth, so you've got multiple signals within the bandwidth that you can listen to, and you're just constantly changing frequencies. You can start with the beacon, which is a really good. That's what I figured out. Start with the beacon so you can find the satellite, and then from there work your way up into the band and try to narrow in on some QSOs and things. But it's as soon as I shift into a QSO, it's over with, and then I'm tracking another one. So what kind of suggestions do you have for jumping from the sort of hit you in the face as it's been described with FM? It's fast, it's furious, it's call sign grid, right?
Yep.
And it seems a little bit more, sometimes a little bit more relaxed on the linear satellites, but it's a whole lot more work, right?
It's
Yeah, I got
definitely-
it. Yeah, guys, I can hear it. I have it on the base. I have it on the Yaesu.
What frequency?
437-800. I put on 805 actually a little bit, and that's where I seem to be getting it. 437-805. And very quick transmissions.
Wasn't visible.
No?
Guy's pretty obscure.
Yeah. I had a quick one. I just heard it, just a couple of quick chunks or whatever from it.
It's interesting that it's always busy. There seems to be almost always traffic on these birds.
Yeah, if you look at the AMSAT status page right now for the satellites, you'll find all sorts of reports, just continuous stuff happening on the ISS repeater. It's really,
Jeff, I'm glad that we had the a little bit of a glitch here in the beginning getting things going, because this way here you kind of stretched out the presentation and you were able to finish up by arranging for the ISS to come over.
Timing was perfect on that.
There it is.
Yeah.
Tom, can you hear it?
What we've done, what Marty and I have done, it was Marty's suggestion originally, is for the FM satellites, use the Yaesu FT3. The FT3, that was a great suggestion that Marty had. FT3, you can record. The HT itself has a record feature. So I was trying to balance my iPhone and trying to record these things. And if it's an FM satellite, I just use that. I record it, and then go back and listen to it afterwards, because there's so many call signs and it's so fast and furious. If you intend to log anything, that's the only way to do it. It was a really good idea.
you gotta have a recorder. It's the only way to go.
It's amazing. I can hear it just on a vertical on the roof on the IC 7000.
Yeah, me too.
It's line of sight, on VHF.
So using a vertical, which if there's any gain, you're probably not going to get as much, a gain up. They're trying to focus it towards the horizon, I believe.
Yeah.
But it's still enough, because it's a low enough satellite pass. You can still get it. So can you talk through right to the horizon almost with it, or do you really need the arrow or the elk to go anywhere past overhead?
You'll do surprisingly well with the quarter wave vertical. I think with a gain vertical, you'll do a little better, particularly out to the horizon, and with the arrow, you'll do a little better still. I mean, it's incremental kind of. I wouldn't say, oh, I got to spend all this money to buy all this stuff before I can even start. That's not really true.
So you don't order the Leo setup, you know, and get everything, you know, to
No,
find out you're not really interested in this.
that's right. I think you start a bit at a time and see where you go.
Unless you
And,
get an extra 1,500 to 2,000 bucks, you don't know what to do with, I suppose.
right. And you know, it depends where you live. I mean, maybe, you know, if your horizon is terrible from your house, then it's probably may not be worth even investing in that stuff. Maybe you're better off to do, you know, more portable stuff.
Well, you had a great slide where you showed yourself out at the beach, you know, and you said this is an ideal horizon. Not all of us can get to an ideal horizon situation like that. So just in a normal, you know, neighborhood situation where there's trees here and there, I've been able to listen almost down to the horizon, almost, you know, but not quite. But I haven't got into any of the satellites yet, too. Is that possible with a beam? You can still go right down, or you know, what's
the trees will affect it some.
Yeah,
but it'll help. Flip side is, for a while I had there's a low spot by the side of my house, and I had a diamond, one of these diamond X50 antennas mounted on the fence down probably level with my first floor. The house blocking, tall trees all around, but there was a slot along the side of the house roughly between north and south. And I could make contacts whenever there was a high angle pass that kind of followed that slot. I could make contacts off that antenna. Otherwise, forget it. But if the satellite can see through, you could see the satellite through that slot. You could make the contacts. So definitely try what you got. And in general, I think if you get out in an area that's open enough that the 20-degree horizon or something like that, that's probably fine. You'll have a lot of sky open to you, and you'll be able to hear and work a lot of passes.
Sorry, it was a little distorted. What was the angle that you had mentioned? It was just a little distorted in your audio there.
I'd say something about 20 degrees, maybe.
20?
You know,
okay.
You should do pretty well, and that was the case in my neighborhood. It's, you know, a sort of a treed neighborhood with a dead end street. I'm at the dead end with a little circle on the end. I stood out in the middle of the circle, and that gave me probably most of the horizon was probably 20, 25 degrees, maybe a little worse towards my house. But it was good enough to make contacts, with a handheld with a little gain whip. So
yeah,
so the video that we did not get to see, and we all will get a chance once we've actually, if you send that as a separate link too, I think you said you would.
Yeah.
To that and to the other fellow that does the presentations. But it sounds like where he was, things were coming fast and furious. If after you recover from your hip surgery and the weather and all the conditions and everything are right, I would imagine the same thing would happen to you if you get out there to FN 51 over at the Marconi site.
Yep. That's a place I was hoping to get to, and health factors intervened for the time being. I would like to do that, because that is one. If one of the things you'll find if you follow either people on Twitter or on the Facebook pages is they'll post their grid maps and show what grids they still need to try to hit all the grids in the country. And some people are really hot on that. Bits of Maine, bits of the out west, and FN 51 are often blank.
I'm guessing too that you said something about when you were down there at the beach. I don't know if that was one of the official parks, but I would guess that whole parks on the air thing would also have another component with the people operating satellites.
Yeah, there's a little of that. There hasn't been a whole lot of crossover, but there has been some for just that reason. I think where I was at South Cape Beach, I think I'm not inside Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge, which is the official POTA site down there. But yeah, I could probably move a little bit and make satellite contacts that were also valid for parks on the air. Yeah,
get more bang for the buck when people work you, and probably generate more of a pileup if you tell them ahead of time.
You never know.
A couple of weeks ago, I think it was a Saturday. I heard Shenandoah National Parks on the air on one of the satellites. I'm not sure which one it was. Geez, I can't remember if it was I think it was a linear. It must have been a linear sat that I heard it going over on, I think. That's kind of surprising. What's that, in Virginia? I think it's down that way. Somewhere down that way.
Yeah, it runs along the Smoky Mountains there somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We appreciate this, and I hope
Thank you.
everything goes well with your upcoming surgery, and then maybe by the time you are out there operating on FN 51, we can we'll get, some of us will have enough experience to give it a try and try to work you. But just the idea of being able to listen. I mean, like Bob just did here tonight, and Tom, we brought up the subject. Hey, there's a pass right now, and this is what you got to tune to. It's happening all the time. We're just not listening. And even in the middle of the night, I would guess that's probably the best time to try to get on there when you don't have quite as much of a crowd. When you have a pass at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you're up, getting a drink of water or something.
Well, I'll give you one more tip. It's kind of an advantage to be on the coast. You'll find that a pass coming through our area from over the pole gives you access here first before the whole southeastern part of the U.S. kind of gets in the footprint. And so a lot of times on a pass like that, you'll have an opportunity to make a few contacts before things go nuts. The other part of that is that if it's a couple of these, the footprint's big enough to work Europe. I've made a couple of contacts in Ireland and trying to remember where else, Portugal, I think, by doing that. And there's not a lot of competition because the footprint's mostly over water to our east. By the same token, if the pass is coming from the south, you'll hear all sorts of activity. And if you're just patient, as it kind of comes north and the folks down south drop out of the footprint, you'll get a chance towards the end of the pass to make contact. So again, you kind of got to play the pass. Think about where it is, when it is, what it's passing over, and go by that.
They don't get frustrated. I think that some people might get discouraged if they get on there and like you say, if they don't know exactly the whole the way things work with the passes like that, you could probably get frustrated. But yet you could have beginner's luck, and the first time you get on, you can make 2 or 3 contacts like you did.
Well, I find that part of the game. That's the part I enjoy, is figuring out how you can get in spite of the fact that, if it was a pass and I lived in Iowa, I'd be really frustrated probably.
So the whole thing about working those low, the ones that are on our eastern horizon, and some of the other people in the country don't get a chance to work over into Europe. It's the same advantage that we have during some of the HF contests, where the New England guys are all working the Europeans before everybody else, the band wakes up.
Yep.
So Jeff, just again, I'm just starting out, but if I don't have a duplex radio, but if I have 2 handhelds, one on VHF, one on UHF or a VU satellite, I could take a handheld Yagi and on the VHF uplink, and then listen on the UHF on the other radio with just a quarter wave whip, and I should be able to hear something with that.
Yeah, you should. Yep. That should work. Again, try.
Okay, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to
try whatever you got.
Check it out.
I just got a text from Chris Babbitt. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. I just got a text from Chris Babbitt, and he thinks he spoke to the ISS, but I don't. Would they be on 2 different frequencies, uplink and downlink?
Yes, they are right now. It's a repeater that uplinks on 2 meters and downlinks on 70 centimeters right now.
So he may think he got through, but I doubt that he did, because he would only have 1 radio. So
yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Don't tell him till tomorrow, Mike.
Well, he wanted to know, when I told him everybody was listening, he wanted to know if we heard him, because he thought he got in, but of course, I'm sure it's so confusing you don't know who they're replying to.
Why don't you put together a satellite, an ISS QSL card and send it to him, from the moon and see what he says.
I actually heard a W1 in there. I couldn't make out the call, but it was a W1.
I want to say, please send up a pizza.
Pi's got some
I
experience
actually,
with that.
I think, yeah, right. That's another whole story. But I think you could tell Mike, you could tell him that the operator is the guy that's behind me.
Yeah, right. Is that a
The
guy?
thing is if you got an HT that does crossband communications, it's not duplex, but that's the way I've operated. You can send up on one, listen to the other. It's just not at the same time.
Yeah, even my mobile, the 7800, that's what I'm gonna program it into it. So I have the, you have non-standard splits. So you just set it up for one channel that transmits on the uplink and receives on the downlink, So.
Yeah, I don't think
Chris, that's what he did.
Yeah.
What am I hearing talking? Somebody's talking. Oh,
What do you have for a home satellite system, Jeff? I see the radio behind you there. So you have for the winter you have the comfort of the shack, and what do you do?
Oh, the backgrounds are fake. That's the old background from K1USN, our club station that no longer exists. And at the time I took a picture, we had an IC9100, which you see to one side of me there, and it was running SAT PC 32 on the screen there. I think it's A91 that I am watching a pass that's just coming north towards our area.
I should have guessed because the clock over your shoulder there above the PC hasn't changed the time at all.
Just a picture.
I should have guessed.
Kind of like your calendar, Larry.
No, well, every other month, Pi, I change it. What kind of a setup? What do you think for a home system? When it's 10 degrees outside, I don't want to go out and chase a satellite. Can you? Is there I've looked into things. You could get moderately, not terribly expensive setups that you can at least stick outside, but I don't know. It does get a little pricey though. So what do you think?
Well, right now I'm betwixt and between, and I've been slowed down a lot for the last umpteen months because of my hip problem. Right at the moment, I'm concentrating on mobile stuff, just because it's easier and you get a nice horizon and stuff. What I'd like to do probably is get the X50 vertical that I have up on the high part of the house. It's more clear of the trees and stuff, and set up that way first. And once I got a bracket on the end of the house, then there's always the possibility of, okay, I've tried that with the vertical. Now I'll get a rotator and try the Yagis that are up angled and try that. I have a couple of old geez, what are they? Down East Microwave or something, 2 meter and 70 centimeter Yagis that I can incorporate into some setup. So it's one of those things that's kind of iterative. Right now, I've got the equipment and it works well in the truck. So you take it out and do that. Next thing I was going to try is just get the 9700 running on the tailgate of the truck with a handheld antenna and try that. I'll tell you, what I have not tried is manually tuning linear satellites. So manually tracking sideband satellites for Doppler is probably the toughest thing you can do.
I've done it with my 817. It's not easy.
Right.
It's a challenge because not only are you following the satellite, but you're also varying the horizontal versus vertical roll, and trying to do the best you can. It's a challenge. It's fun. It's a bit of a challenge.
but the laptop has batteries, so I could run the software and just run tracking software while I'm sitting there in the back of the truck. And that's what I've done from inside, just using the vertical, making linear contacts, just sitting in the cab of the truck, the little vertical on the roof, out in the open, and you can make a few contacts that way, and the software does all the work for you.
It does all the Doppler for you.
It
right?
does all that for you.
Concentrate on the QSO itself.
Yeah, and if the other guy's using the same stuff, you find each other and you can talk for 3, 4, 5 minutes during the pass, which I've done.
Yeah.
So, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but the thing about the HF satellites, but my introduction to satellites was through that RS 1213. And we actually had rag chews. You could maybe work half a dozen people during say a 15 or 16-minute pass, but you'd actually have a contact with them, exchange your name and a few other things. And I got to meet a bunch of people. But the thing was, there was no problem with the Doppler shift on HF, and I never tuned, and I never tuned. I just stayed in one spot, and it was great. It really was. So it made it so much easier for someone that was trying to learn brand new, rather than have to, obviously there's a lot of skill involved in doing this and doing it right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even with the FM satellites, the 2-meter end of things doesn't really need to be tuned. The capture effect is good enough to keep you okay there. You're always tuning the 70 centimeter end of things, whether it's receive or transmit. That's where you got to tune. But on sideband, it's enough of a shift even at 2 meters that you got to be tuning a little bit there and a bunch more on 70 centimeters. And so you're a one-arm paper hanger who's really in trouble.
You're working. You're working.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't ask this question, but the HF satellites all had a CW beacon. Yep. And do any of these FM satellites have a beacon or anything like that?
I don't think any of the FM ones do. All the large majority of the linears do. They tend to have that, and you can find that. I think
it's listed in the MSAT.
Yeah, and I think both SAT PC 32 and Mac Doppler have a setup where they know the transmit and receive frequencies for the transponder, but they also know the frequency for the beacon, and they track that, and so you can pretty easily find the beacon and listen to that.
Okay, so I'm kind of thinking here now. I mean, because I used to just monitor like the 10-meter beacon frequency for RS-12, even if I wasn't tracking it. It would, I'd have the radio on in the background. All of a sudden, the satellite would come up over the horizon, and the beacon would immediately become audible, and you could hear it, and then you just go, all right, I'm going to tune up the band and start working people. But on the FMs, let's say the FM satellites, you know what the frequency is for all of these FM satellites, and even if you're not specifically tracking each one, if you took your dual band radio that you have sitting on a desk in the shack, and you programmed a bank of the downlink frequencies for all of the satellites that we should normally be able to hear, if you just have that on scan, I would think anytime, even if you weren't specifically watching a tracking program, that when a satellite became visible to you, you'd start hearing conversation on there.
Yeah, you could probably do that. I mean, I think the beacons are typically on 2 meters, so they're not going to move a lot. And probably the thing.
No, I wasn't talking about the beacons. I'm talking about the actual FM frequency where we were just listening to the people talking on the ISS and everything. If you just have those frequencies programmed in, and you're scanning, and then when any one of those satellites becomes visible to you or audible, you'd start to hear conversation on there.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
My guess would be that you wouldn't hear it because of your squelch. Your squelch would be up part way, and until it was actually a pretty strong signal within a closer overhead pass, it probably wouldn't break your squelch. Because when I've been listening to these FM satellites, I drop squelch right down to 0 so I can hear everything, and then try to pick it up as it's coming, anywhere close. And the strong signals are fine, but then you're tracking it as it goes away. So I guess you'd have to have your squelch up fairly high in order so it would scan until it picks something up pretty strong.
That's a good point that I should have mentioned, I guess, is when you're operating FM satellites, your squelch is off. You can't have squelch on. You'll miss a lot because things are weak, things fade. It would drive you nuts, in fact, because as it fades, it would tend to drop out when you hear it fade with no squelch on there, you can actually move the antenna a little bit and make it stronger. They're typically tumbling at some low rate, I think. And so there definitely changes over the course of the pass. And even sometimes between, some people think that it makes a difference to turn your antenna 90 degrees between transmit and receive. I haven't really noticed that that's a real helpful thing. But if you look at the way those things are actually physically put together, the two little dipoles on the little CubeSats are at right angles to one another. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I haven't had much trouble just making contacts with them.
Thank
I'm going
God
to have to
for
leave
analog.
the meeting. I just want to thank you, Jeff. That was a really good presentation, very interesting. For someone that's primarily an HF guy, that was a quite interesting presentation. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.